Very excited about robotics. Robotics are computers that need to, in many cases, know about the physical world. Humanoid robots, as wild as that seems, are coming. That we're going to be working with them, maybe playing with them. They're going to be walking through the streets of San Francisco as surely as the Waymos and Zooks are out there today. And they need to know how to understand and navigate through physical space. So things like our large geospatial models, I think, are going to help solve that problem.
Welcome to Game Theory, how play is changing everything. A new video podcast from Lightspeed and Goldman Sachs in partnership with McKinsey, where we sit down with some of the world's leading executives across gaming and interactive media and speak about the defining companies of the industry, the leaders who shape them, and how play has been changing consumer behavior and tech innovation for decades. I'm your co-host, Moritz Baier-Lentz.
I'm your co-host, Hemal Thaker.
And today we're joined by John Hanke, founder and CEO of Niantic. Let's jump right in. We talked a little bit about your perspective on the role of play in contrast to work. So in the spirit of this podcast, let's start right there.
That's a great topic. Well, we make games, so pro play. And, I love the idea that when we grow up and become adults, that we can hang on to some of that delight and joy that we all had as kids, when we're playing. For us at Niantic, it's about outdoor play. So, I think back to the times that we had, playing superhero or building forts and all that, and, just trying to preserve some of that. I think part of it stemmed from being a parent. We hear from a lot of parents who've enjoyed playing our games with their kids. It was a thought that occurred to me when my youngest was, he was probably 11 or 12 years old. And he was just playing a lot of games, which I had encouraged because games were my sort of foray into technology and programming. But it was, a lot of screen time. And I was thinking about alternatives. We live in California. It's a beautiful place. There's so much to do outside. And the thought was maybe you could combine those things. Maybe you could take some of those characteristics of video games, which make them so kind of addictive at times, and marry that with the idea of just being outside and exploring and playing. Resonated. We built some prototypes initially, launched some early games like Ingress, and then later on Pokémon GO. But it seemed to really fill a void for people. Drew on what's best in video games, but it tapped into those things that really drive us as human beings, being active and moving, having face-to-face time with other people, and just being out and seeing new places in the world. So all those, kind of positive things sort of wrapped together has been, our focus for the past decade.
And I think for you yourself, being out and outside is part of how you live and work. I think you talk a lot about taking a walk. So what is the magic about taking a walk?
It's something I probably took for granted when I was a kid. I did grow up at a time when we did have a lot of free time to play outside, and we roamed through the town on our, 20-inch Schwinn, bicycles. But then as an adult, I got caught up, as many of us do, in kind of the grind of work. I was commuting, here in the Valley. I was spending 2 to 3+ hours a day in my car. And it was mid-career and after I had kids when I felt like I kind of needed something more and reoriented my life to get more exercise and to incorporate walking and being active into my daily routine. And I found it was super helpful for my energy level, for my mental health. And I think just also for mental acuity and ideas, it was great. And it just corresponded with getting interested in building these products and, the story I was just talking about how Niantic got started. So it all kind of happened at the same time for me. But I'm a big believer in really following through on that. So, I'm a bike commuter and love getting out and hiking and walking and exploring.
This focus did not start for you with Niantic. I think it goes back a lot further to your time at Google as well, where you worked on the Google Maps team. There's a fascination with mapping the world that predates Ingress. And I think to a large extent, that's also the business that maybe you are always most excited about and are continuing to lead on with Niantic Spatial. But let's go back a bit to the Google days and Google Maps and this fascination of mapping the world and how that led to Niantic Spatial and, ultimately also the games experiences.
It goes back to my childhood. I I grew up with 8-bit computers, the very first generation of video games. I loved all that stuff when I was a kid. I also was bored a lot as a kid. I grew up in West Texas, a really small town. There wasn't a lot to do. Remember at one point, one of our neighbors brought this, grocery bag full of magazines, and it was a stack of back issues of National Geographic. And, we didn't travel as much in those days. Like we didn't really go, more, than a few hundred miles from home. And so it was a great way to just kind of get a taste for like what was out there in the world. And they had those great fold out maps. And I don't know, I think that maybe planted a seed, just curiosity for what's out there. I've always enjoyed traveling. And in my career, when I had an opportunity to combine video games in terms of like high performance 3D graphics and interactivity with maps, which was at the heart of Keyhole, which then, went on to become Google Earth after we became part of Google, that was a dream come true. It was like a lot of the fun things about video games combined with mapping the world and putting all this information into an accessible place and making it fun to just spin the globe and zoom down and see new places in the world. Then people began making mashups. If you remember like the early days of Google Maps, people just started mapping things they were interested in. So all kinds of sites and apps popped up where people were putting like really cool information about the world. Kind of, I was fascinated by these, like the hidden gems, that people knew about in different places, but maybe weren't popularized or weren't available elsewhere. So I kind of got into the habit, if I was going to travel somewhere, I would sort of mine those sources to try to find the really cool stuff that, I might not otherwise know about. That was the seed that kind of turned into Niantic when it was at first, a research project inside of Google, and then, went on to these other things.
And that is what lives on in Niantic Spatial.
I think so. We're embarking on a whole new phase now. Yeah.
So, you've built some amazing games through time, and I think not only are they wonderful, but many of them have taken the world by storm. I still remember in 2016, the virality and the enthusiasm around Pokémon GO. I'm curious, as you built many others as well, Monster Hunter Now, Pikmin Bloom, etc. What have these games taught you about connecting technology to the real world?
Well, originally we had a theory that it would be fun to do that, but it was really just a theory. And what we've learned in putting these games out, starting first with Ingress, which was, very experimental, kind of edgy game, and then going on to, Pokemon GO and others, was that people get a lot out of it. Now we've heard countless stories back from players, and we've been getting letters and, kind of fan mail from people for a decade about rediscovering like parts of their own city that they didn't know about. It might be just park that's near their house that they hadn't visited. It might be a historic site in their town. They didn't make that connection to, what had gone on before. And then also being drawn together with other people and having a way to meet new people. I think in this digital era, we're all behind screens all the time, and it's actually harder to find ways to interact with new people that are maybe outside of your circle. And our games sort of broke down barriers and brought people together in the real world. And, we heard a lot of positive feedback from that. So, and the other big theory was, going back to thinking about my own kids, and the genesis of it was, I've heard from so many parents who were able to go out and use this as a way to spend time, with their kids that, maybe their kids didn't realize there was an ulterior motive by the parent, but, they could play the game together and have a way to just have some space and time for conversation and quality time. I think people have gotten a lot out of that. Yeah.
I actually distinctly remember when Pokemon GO came out. I think it was in my first or second year as associate at Goldman, and there wasn't too much time to walk around the city. And it was actually a perfect spot because it had water, park, landmarks. So all the interesting Pokemon were hiding near us. And I think all the analysts and associates figured out that you could beautifully stack these lure modules on like 42 floors of the Goldman building. So it's just like epicenter, this vortex that sucked in all of Manhattan's Pokemon, and you could conveniently capture them from your desk.
Hopefully you also got out and walked around the city a little bit.
Occasionally, and not into traffic.
Good.
Yeah.
I'd love to ask, actually, where did you come up with the name Niantic? What does it mean?
So we knew we wanted to explore this idea of maybe the hidden gems in the world, like this data that we had been seeing, in Google Maps and the sort of seed of the idea was maybe we could help people discover the hidden gems of the world. And we're thinking about that. And I was doing some research on San Francisco, and I came across this whole history of the city, which goes back to the gold rush, where all these people came to San Francisco to make their fortune. The ships came to the harbor, and basically the ships just stacked up in the harbor, and people went to the hills, looked for gold, and there was nobody to sell the ships away. So modern day San Francisco got built on top of these ships. So there's something like 20 some odd ships that are buried under the streets of present day San Francisco. There are markers for some of them. And the Niantic is probably, maybe the most famous. It was partially excavated 20 or 30 years ago. It's right near the Transamerica building. And I just thought it was a great story. It was like a physical embodiment of this idea of like the sort of secret history of the world. It's just beyond your sight, and helping people connect with that, I thought was cool. And we named our group that. It was kind of a weird name. And I remember at one of the early TGIF meetings, we were kind of presenting this at Google, and a guy walks up to me later and says, "Oh, was my great-great-grandfather was, I don't remember if it was the captain or the navigator, but he was on that ship, and he like sailed it to San Francisco." So
it's
unexpected.
Yeah, that's a great name. So I guess, you build this wonderful company and you have this fantastic vision, and you've recently done a transaction separating out the content games part of the business from a platform. Tell us a little bit about that, the origin of that, and the thinking that went behind that, and where you see Spatial going now.
You have to understand kind of what we were going for originally. And we started looking at the space I was describing, like these hidden gems of the world. We were thinking about in the context of creating enabling technology. So just as, Google Maps had become this part of the fabric really of Web 2.0 that so many other businesses were built on top of, we were thinking about, what kinds of data and services could we create that would embody this, or not embody, but be part of this new wave of applications that we thought would come with the spread of mobile and maybe devices that would come after mobile. So we're thinking about it from a platform perspective originally, and we built some apps to sort of demonstrate the concept, starting with Field Trip and then Ingress. And then after we spun out of Google, we had this other project in the works called Pokémon GO, and it launched and achieved this level of popularity that really turned us into a gaming company. And I feel so fortunate to have been part of that. It wasn't the original plan. It accidentally became a pretty big gaming company.
Billion-dollar franchise.
We've been pursuing that, with other games and growing and building that and adding, real world meetups and other components to that game. But we always had this ambition to take the technology side of the business and really put it out there into the world so other people could leverage it. And that technology became kind of more involved and sophisticated over the years. And yeah, it felt like it was time to let both businesses, sort of have their moment in the spotlight. And the game company, we think it's a great home with Scopely. A lot of resources continue to invest and grow that. A lot of support from Scopely in our real world community and strategy around that. And it gives us now the chance to take the spatial technologies and make them the star of the show, put all of our thought and energy behind those, and move that business forward.
We just had Walter for a podcast episode as well, and he talked about really being intentional about making sure the spirit, the idea, the special sauce of any acquisition targets live on in Scopely. What do you think are, obviously beyond the games and the technology that was built, what are some of the cultural nuggets of Niantic that you're really proud of that might live on inside Scopely and might actually enrich Scopely's other divisions as well?
Yeah, as you can imagine, we spent a lot of time talking about that. One great example, I think, is our community days that we do for all of our games, but notably for Pokémon GO. And we built technology infrastructure to facilitate that. It's an app called Campfire that lets people check in and basically arrange and do community meetups in the real world. And so every month that happens in thousands of places around the world. Pokémon GO players come together. We had over 6 million people check in on that app last year. And it's just, I think it's a core that community and the way we take care of it is a core part of what the game's all about. And I think Scopely's really excited about that and is thinking about how can we grow this? How can we maybe use this with other games and so on? I think our live events are another thing that they see the value in. And, these are events like Pokémon GO Fest. We do similar events for Monster Hunter and for Pikmin. We will have 10,000, 20,000, sometimes as many as we've had 100,000 people in a single day converge for these things. So there's really nothing else like it in the world in terms of live participatory gaming event. It's not like esports where you're watching other people play. Everybody's, it's almost like a 5K or marathon or something. Like everybody's part of it. Mm-hmm. It's really special, and families come and groups come. So I think that's another thing that they're seeing a lot of value in, and we'll see that grow and continue in the future.
Awesome.
So how do you see location-based games evolving over the next, 5-10 years?
We got excited about it originally because cell phones were becoming more and more capable around the time that we started looking at this. This was roughly 2010, things that we take for granted today about like reliable GPS and, reasonable 3D graphics on the device were there. So we could think about building. And when I think about what's going to happen in the next 10 years, as we finally get wearables, and, I say that carefully because people have been talking a lot about, wearable devices, AR glasses, and so on.
It always feels like it's 5 years out. For the last 5 years that I've been looking at it, it always feels like it's 5 years out.
That has been said. But it is really happening. And if at least that's where, I'd put my money if I were banking on what the next big device is going to be over the next half decade or so. I think Meta showed everybody that it's possible with Orion, and I really appreciate the level of investment that they put into that. Even as other people kind of fell to the wayside, they kept with it, and it's a phenomenal device, and it really shows what's possible. So that at a consumer price point will happen, and as that happens, it'll be used, of course, I think for many, many things, but you can imagine some incredible games where, you get away from the biggest drawback with playing our games outside today is the fact that you have to use your phone. Sure. And as much as we want to bring people together to spend time together and talk and families to spend time together, you're doing that, but you have a device that sometimes gets in the way. So I think glasses are one of the solutions to make that a smoother experience. And then when you think about what could you do with that, games and gaming from an immersion point of view and visual fidelity, we know what AI visuals, are capable of today. You can imagine really transformative visual and auditory experiences where you're in the real world, but it's, taking you someplace else at the same time and really immersing you in that. So I think we're going to see that, in the next decade. That's going to be very exciting.
On this topic of wearable devices and augmentation and kind of getting in the way. Like one thing that has excited us quite a bit, I would say over the last year or two, are this new class of hardware devices that primarily augment logically through the introduction of AI. I mean, again, a great example from Meta with the Ray-Ban glasses. Maybe AI is actually going to be the driver of like novel, previously impossible experiences that don't require visual augmentation, that go around all these shortcomings in physics, optics that are still holding us back from that AR promise, which frankly hasn't quite been delivered. But they also don't need to be two different worlds, right? I think both of these technological advances, AR and optics and AI, are happening at the same time. What do you think about what gets you more excited? Like infusing wearables with proper AI functionality or figuring out AR or both?
I mean, it's an exciting thing to think about because there's so many creative minds right now trying to figure out the answer to that question of like, what's the right combination of kind of sensory inputs to put into a device that can bring you the power of an AI and do other things for you, including entertain you. I think audio has always been undervalued in a way. Visuals get people excited. Game demos are often about what the graphics look like. But when you think about what's impacting you emotionally, often music and sound effects and audio are as powerful as what you're seeing. And then obviously as an information, conduit, we we live through language, and it can be an incredibly powerful way. Storytelling is about language. So what you can do with an audio only device is deep. I don't think it's as exciting to like marketers and people. It's been kind of a hard sell. Great example of a product that has no visual component to it, has audio in a really elegant way, and lets you connect with an AI. It's incredibly powerful. But I think even for games and entertainment, you could deliver some amazing immersive experiences, just with audio. So.
Yeah, and to some extent, these user interfaces for how we interact with foundation models today are really just primitive. Text-based prompts. I mean, even if tech capabilities of foundation models stay where they are today, and that's probably not going to be the case, at least we believe so, there's so much you can do with having organizations, but also individuals just leverage them more. And I think a big barrier to that today is the form of the interface and the form factor. And that's, frankly, I get very excited about what AR glasses, augmented reality in the sense of even just logically, intelligently augmented reality could do to humanity extracting most value from the tech that's already built today and will only get better.
Well, that's a good tee up to Niantic Spatial and what we're working on. This idea of a large geospatial model. The idea there is to build a map of the world that's really a map designed for machines, as much as it is, or even more than it's designed for people. We're talking about a 3D reconstruction of the world, but a reconstruction that's in the form that a computer can readily understand it. And that can enable things as simple as very precise location. So in the example of audio connection to an AI, if you have a camera, being able to really know precisely where you are in the world, what's within your field of view, what's coming in, and interpret that, you can get a lot more out of the AI, even without asking any questions. It provides powerful context. That's the beginning. As AIs become, used more and more for deeper problem solving, and AIs need to pull in information from a variety of sources to answer difficult, challenging, valuable questions, we think having a 3D map of the world that is semantically rich and enabling an AI to natively interrogate that and pull information from that offers the potential to generate a huge amount of value. Yeah, agree. This context of the world for us and for AIs is, we're just scratching the surface of what we can do there.
I'd love to double click a little bit more on Niantic Spatial, because I think obviously a lot of people have experienced some of your capabilities through Pokémon or any of the other games that you have from a consumer perspective. But I know there's a lot more that's under the hood than that. Tell us a little bit more about the platform. I think in many ways it's almost like the best setup startup you can possibly ask for. You have all the tech and you have capital to go run with it. But where will it be applied? Where do you think the value to customers in all different verticals might be? What sort of applications do you envisage it enabling, and what technology sort of supports all of that you have? Which is, candidly, I feel very differentiated, but I think useful for our listeners to understand.
Yeah, so we've been working for the past several years to build up this 3D map, and it powers features today in games like Pokémon GO, where you can go to a Pokéstop, one of the locations in the world that's been mapped, and you can leave your Pokemon there, and other players can go to that location. They can see that, Hemal was here, and he left his Pikachu here, and they can leave a Pokemon there. It's a kind of social proof of presence. But it's all based on the ability to, map these areas and then localize against them. So we've built up these maps for about 1 million locations around the world today. We have another 10 million or so locations that are in the pipeline that we're publishing out. And that provides the foundation for this global map that I'm talking about. The uses that we imagine for it, going forward with Niantic Spatial, then extend beyond gaming into enterprise uses. Really any kind of application where you need precise navigation or knowledge of the world is a candidate for improvement with this technology. So one of the examples would be delivery and logistics operations where you need to put something at a very specific place in the world. This might be a consumer's doorstep. It might be picking up food from the side window of a restaurant in a very specific location. You have a delivery driver that needs to be efficient, needs to know exactly where to go to deliver something or retrieve something. And so with our technology, those areas can be very precisely mapped with something as lightweight as a cell phone. And then you can literally paint an animated path on the ground to where you need to go. That's the beginning. As this model takes on semantic characteristics, which is the next phase of research and development that we're in, then you have something that can be accessed via an API, again, by an AI or by a human to help solve problems about the physical world or answer questions about the physical world in a way that today's language models really can't. You could think of it as a difference, between something like an infinitely zoomable globe and a stack of library books. The books are great for retrieving information in a certain way, but if you want the sort of spatial coherence of data and data that pertains to the physical world rather than to kind of things that we as humans have written about, we're going to make that available. And how that will ultimately be used and consumed, I think, we will find out. We were shocked by the, thousands, then hundreds of thousands and millions of ways that people use the Google Maps API. I think the opportunity there is, for something similar, or we will learn about the utility of that as we go. Very excited about robotics. Robotics are computers that need to, in many cases, know about the physical world. Humanoid robots, as wild as that seems, are coming. That we're going to be working with them, maybe playing with them. They're going to be walking through the streets of San Francisco as surely as the Waymos and Zooks are out there today. And they need to know how to understand and navigate through physical space. So things like our large geospatial models, I think, are going to help solve that problem.
Sounds like a foundational technology to me for the future. So I'm excited to see where you take it. There's a human using it and there's an AI using it. What's the difference? How should people understand where that could go in the next 5-10 years?
We've been building these maps using neural networks, and then we have been evolving that technology over the past several years. So as we pull in this imagery data and craft these 3D maps, that is done through a set of neural networks. We're now aggregating these disparate million-plus maps into a single data set and a single thing that we can train on. So the model then becomes as smart as the data in all of those individual maps. And then as we add semantics to it, you're adding language model like word understanding of the contents of the world to that same 3D space. So it's really a convergence of AI in language form and AI in visual and 3D form that we're talking about when we talk about a large geospatial model. In terms of how it can be used to help humans. It can be used in glasses like, future form factors like Orion, or on cell phones or other mechanisms to help us know what's in the world, know where we are in the world, to navigate in it, ask questions about it. But then I think the really interesting part is when it's helping computers navigate the world and answer questions about the world. So there's a level of abstraction there that sort of unleashes machine intelligence on the sort of knowledge of the planet. Yeah, that's an exciting thing to think about. We want to be responsible about that. It's an interesting future, one we want to approach mindfully and carefully, and that's part of the way we're setting up the company and the values that we want to build it around.
You've been avoiding one term that's been floating around recently, which is this idea of world models, and you've been calling it a geospatial model. So I'm sure that's conscious, and maybe you can tease out for us where you see the differences. Do you think that this catalog, this data that you're creating here, could ultimately also be used as training data for generative games, which is this idea that world models are pursuing, in addition to applications in robotics, probably autonomous driving, etc.?
Yeah, we are careful with the language we use for the work that we're doing, which I think is fairly novel at the intersection of real world 3D mapping data and AI. A closely related area where there's other work going on, people are talking about world models. And the distinction there is that many of those, maybe all of them, are really focused on generating models of fictitious worlds, imagined worlds through diffusion techniques. And it's exciting work. It is taking the output of the models pre-world model. You could sort of provide a view of a world, but you couldn't provide a consistent 3D world. So you couldn't provide a world that you could walk around in that would be logically consistent. So that if you walked in one direction, turned around and walked back, things would look different. in a pre-world model.
For now, I mean, we have memory issues and I guess lack of statefulness in these experiences. But I mean, I always, as an investor, I always like to squint and remember how the first Midjourney images look like and tell myself it'll be fine eventually.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the point I'm making is that world models are solving that problem. And I think it's super interesting. So it opens the door to generative imagined worlds that can be logically consistent, that you can play games in and, immerse yourself in. And I think there are many, many uses for that. We're really focused on understanding what's really in the world, real physical contents of the world. There are generative techniques that we would use to maybe fill in gaps in that, but the goal is always to recreate a version of the world that's as accurate as possible.
You're not building a world model, you're building the world model. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's a good distinction. I like that.
AI today may be described as book smart. How do you think about making AI street smart? And I suppose there's probably a part of that you're playing into here with respect to understanding the real world.
I like the way you put that. It's about making AI street smart. Yeah, information mined from books allows language models to do a lot and are incredibly powerful. We do think that when you build up a model from the semantic contents of the real world with that spatial structure to it, that it adds a dimension to reasoning and understanding about the physical world that you don't get from models that are trained purely on textual data. And we think together that creates a really powerful system that can answer questions that today's AIs can't answer. And that's what we're building.
What's the most challenging part of doing this, blending digital and physical worlds together, in your opinion? Because you're at the intersection of that, and maybe you're one of the few who are. But it's clearly, important for the future.
AI and the work is about training models to do things. And a lot of that is about algorithmic techniques and systems, but a lot of it's also about data and the inputs that you have to train these models on. So in our case, we want to make our model really smart about the real world. And we're fortunate to have a data set that we've been working on for several years. It's fairly unique, that provides this structured 3D view of one growing to 10 million places in the world. So having the right inputs to build these models on, that is the big challenge. And it's one that we've been working on, and we'll continue to look for ways to feed our efforts with ever more data about the real world to make it more capable.
And I suppose as people start using your platform to develop applications or enterprise applications, etc., that's going to only compound, right? And for the benefit of everybody, essentially, in terms of the data sources that you ultimately get access to through the applications. Is that right?
Certainly there's a potential for that. As people want to deploy this capability in areas where we don't already have data, again, our Scaniverse application is one way to get data into the system. So our partners will be able to use that. We have a system called Photon, which is a sort of scaled up version of that. It's a dedicated piece of proprietary hardware for mapping larger areas. And then there are ways that we can incorporate data from other kinds of camera systems that might be on delivery vans. We're now beginning to incorporate data from platforms like drones. We're beginning to incorporate LiDAR data to properly tie all of the inputs together and register it in an accurate global reference system. So as we go deeper into these verticals, I think there will be opportunities for us to expand that data coverage more and more.
And just for our listeners who will hear it here for the first time, what year will we have a digital twin of the entire Earth?
Okay, that's an interesting question. I think less than a decade. The success or failure of that prediction will rely on our ability to create models that can build that from incomplete inputs. The challenge is to train a model with enough data about the real world that can help autocomplete sentences, in the sense of autocomplete parts of the world that may not be explicitly collected, with sufficient accuracy and detail to enable the use cases that I'm describing. And if you can get past that threshold, then you can build much, hesitate to say all, but you can build a lot of the world.
One of the questions we like to ask our guests on this show goes a little bit more in a personal direction. And it is about this idea of play, kind of contrasted to work. Play as this safe exploration, and work maybe as more of a conscious effort. I think play sometimes has a bit of a bad rap in business as not being something serious. Do you think that play, or first of all, are you a player in quotation marks in kind of like your personal life and at work? Do you think play has made you a better person, a better leader? Like, how does play find its way into your world?
Yeah, it's such an interesting word. We make products that are about play. I think if you use play in the context of work, it scares a lot of people because they think about, oh, it's frivolous. It's somebody laughing and not working hard, or something they don't really associate with productivity necessarily. And I mean, we work hard. We're a serious company. Even when we're making products for play, I think the way it comes into the workplace is really through a mindset that is kind of the essence of play, that aspect of it that is sort of self-motivated, self-driven. When you're engaged in something that's so powerful to you personally, that is kind of pulling you in and motivating you to go deeper and do and learn. And so we try to set up the company so that we're working on things that really feel like fun, because the problem is hard and the solution is hard, but finding it as part of a team is can be fun and can have those characteristics of play. So I think being open to that, trying to create an environment where that's possible. It is possible to combine that with work, but maybe not in the way that you would immediately, imagine. People are not popping confetti and, playing Parcheesi, but
really, because that was the answer that we got from everyone else. So
a big part of it for me is physical activity. And, even though we're doing knowledge work, even though people may be writing code or working on documents or things like that, moving and incorporating that into the routine, if at all possible. I mentioned I'm a bike commuter. That's a big part of kind of how I work, is that time to sort of process walking one-on-ones, events where we're getting people outside. We'll do a Niantic Explorers event here in a few weeks. That's something we've done as a company, where we go out on a kind of treasure hunt through the streets of San Francisco. That kind of movement is a great way to stimulate, I think, creativity and really energize thinking and get to new solutions and kind of get the motivation, to get there.
Dave from Roblox in one of our episodes talked about replacing 90% of the snacks and really taking a holistic wellness, health approach, even to employeeship at Roblox. So when are all the Niantic snacks leaving the fridge?
Yeah, we try to encourage people to be active. Like, we have a commuter reimbursement program for, cyclists as well as people who ride public transportation. We do these events like Niantic Explorers. We try to, walk the walk, and for that type of thing. And I think that's where the biggest benefit is. I mean, walking is miraculous. It's accessible to us at almost any time. It's free. It's great for physical well-being. It doesn't take that much to radically change your health, your physical health. And it has great mental health benefits. An average amount of walking, 6,000, 8,000 steps a day, can have as much of an impact on your mood as a prescription drug. It's super powerful, and it doesn't cost anything. We try to encourage that, and I try to live that, and it's out there and accessible.
I think one day when someone writes the history of gaming and looks back what you've done in bridging physical with digital, I think that will be a pivotal moment someday in the history of gaming. But today you're sitting at the intersection of AI, geospatial, tech, gaming. In many ways, you kind of have a lens into the future in a way that people may not. I'm curious, wherever your imagination takes you, what's the wildest future you can imagine with all these technologies? Or what's the future you'd like to see?
I'm taking notes now, because this is where we need to invest.
I like that second phrasing of that question. What future would I like to see? Because certainly there are versions of this which could go wildly off the rails, and much has been written about that, and a lot of people talk about that. I won't spend time on it. I do think that one of the things that we can all do, with our professional work and professional lives, is try to look for ways to shape the future in the direction that we want it to go. It's the only way it will get there. I can imagine a future where we get through some of the conflict and some of the challenges that we're facing today and reconnect communities and people using technology in a way that lets us build the kind of peaceful and abundant future that we would all like to see. I do think it's about harnessing technology to help us thrive as humans and connect together with other humans in community and families of any way you want to define family, but groups of people and friends. And it's easy to get lost in things that don't do that or start out doing that and turn into something else. But if we can stay focused on that and put energy and effort and capital against that, I do think you can build profitable businesses along the way. It's going to take, continued work by all of us and probably future generations of people, in the technology industry to keep that on track and make sure that we get to that kind of outcome.
I really like the constructive optimism. I think it's really important for leaders like you and I guess aspiring leaders like us to stay optimistic, because if we're not excited about the future, then what are we building for? So thanks for pushing us into a technologically enabled and exciting and not dystopian future. All right, unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. Thanks again for tuning in. Thank you for our listeners. And if you liked what you heard, go to lsvp.com/game theory for more episodes. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thanks.